The Wyoming mountains in winter were no place for the living. Snow fell thick as wool blankets, piling against the pines until their branches groaned and snapped. Wind howled through the passes like the voices of the dead. And at night, wolves sang their hunger to a moon that offered no mercy. The cliffs rose jagged and mean, ice-slicked death traps that had claimed more than one fool who thought he could conquer them. It was here, in this frozen hell, that Silas Thorne had built his life. The cabin sat hunched against a granite wall, logs black with age and weather, smoke trickling from a stone chimney like the last breath of a dying man. Inside, Silas bent over his trap repairs, massive hands working with surprising delicacy on the steel springs. Scars crisscrossed those hands like a map of violence, some from bears, some from men, all from a life that had never shown kindness. He was a mountain of a man himself, 6.5 feet of muscle and bone wrapped in buckskin and fury. His face might have been handsome once, before the grizzly took half his cheek, before the knife fights left their signatures across his jaw. His hair hung black and wild to his shoulders, shot through with premature gray. But it was his eyes that made men step back, dark as cave mouths, holding shadows that went down forever. The letter lay on the rough table, already worn from his fingers worrying at it. Another bride was coming, the 4th one now, if he counted right. The marriage broker in Denver kept sending them, kept taking Silas's money and promising a good woman who won't mind the isolation. They never lasted. The first had screamed at the sight of him and locked herself in the storage shed until he could arrange her passage back. The second made it 3 days before the silence broke her nerve. The third, young, pretty thing, had run off in the night, nearly froze to death before he found her huddled in a snow cave, lips blue as spring violets. Should have learned by now, he muttered, voice rough from disuse. Sometimes he went weeks without speaking to anything but his horse. The woman would arrive tomorrow, weather permitting. The last wagon of the season before the passes closed. After that, they'd be trapped together until spring. Him and whatever desperate female thought she could survive where others had failed. He'd been young once, foolish enough to believe in softness. Had a wife, sweet Sarah with corn silk hair and a laugh like church bells. A daughter too, little Emma, who'd just learned to say Papa when the raiders came. He'd been away, checking his trap lines, returned to smoke and blood and silence. That was 15 years past. But the wound still bled fresh when the wind was right. Tomorrow, another woman would look at him, at this place, and understand her mistake. He'd see the fear bloom in her eyes, watch her shrink away from his scarred hands. And in a week, maybe less, he'd be hitching up the wagon again, taking her back to town while she wept with relief. Damn fool business, he said to the empty room, miles away, in a house that had never been home. Mabel Grace stood before the cracked mirror and tried to see what others saw. The reflection wasn't kind. Never had been. Round face, sun-damaged from years of washing in the yard. Body that took up space, that made chairs creak and men look away. Her hands were rough as any farm boy's. Her hair a dull brown that wouldn't hold a curl no matter how her foster mother tortured it with hot irons. "Stop fussing, Mrs." Henderson snapped from the doorway. "Won't make no difference anyhow. The man's paid for a wife, not a beauty." Mabel dropped her hands, let them hang at her sides. 28 years old, passed over so many times she'd lost count. The young men in town looked through her like glass. The old widowers measured her with their eyes and found her wanting. Too big, too plain, too much of everything and not enough of what mattered. "At least you're strong." "Mister," Henderson said. Not unkindly. He'd taken her in when she was 12, after the fever took her parents. "Mountain man needs a woman who can work. Pretty don't keep a fire burning." They'd told her little about her intended husband, Silas Thorne, trapper and hunter. Lived alone in the high country. Paid in gold coin for a wife who could cook, clean, keep a cabin. The marriage broker had been honest about the isolation, the hard life. The fact that 3 women had already fled back to civilization. Man must be a monster. "Mrs." Henderson had whispered, but not quiet enough. Maybe he was. But Mabel had lived with monsters before. The kind that smiled in church and cornered her in the barn. That whispered filth while their hands grabbed at her body. At least this monster lived far from everyone else. The wagon came before dawn, driven by a leather-faced man who spat tobacco and eyed Mabel like cargo. Her possessions fit in one small trunk. 2 dresses, a Bible she couldn't read well, her mother's cast-iron pot, and a quilt she'd stitched from scraps. The Hendersons stood on the porch, relief plain on their faces. One less mouth to feed, one less reminder of Christian charity. "There's coffee and biscuits for the journey," Mrs. Henderson said, handing up a bundle. "And flour, 2 sacks. Wedding gift." Wedding gift. As if this was anything but a transaction. One unwanted woman for whatever gold a mountain man could scrape together. The journey into the mountains was a descent into another world. The wagon road narrowed to a track, then to barely a suggestion between the pines. Snow began falling the second day, fat flakes that stuck to Mabel's eyelashes and turned the world white and strange. The driver grew increasingly nervous, pushing the horses harder as the drifts deepened. "Storm coming," he muttered. "Big one. We don't make it by nightfall. We're done for." The wagon hit a buried rock, lurched sideways. Mabel heard the axle crack like a gunshot. The driver cursed, fought the reins, but the wagon tilted, and went over. She flew through white air, landed hard in a drift that knocked the breath from her lungs. Snow filled her mouth, her nose. She flailed, panicked, certain she would die here, frozen and forgotten before she even met the monster she'd been sold to. Strong hands grabbed her shoulders, hauled her up into blazing daylight. She gasped, choked, blinked snow from her eyes, and looked up into a face from nightmare. The scars were the first thing she saw, deep gouges across one cheek that pulled his mouth into a permanent sneer. Then the size of him, blocking out the sun, dark eyes that looked at her with complete indifference, as if she were a sack of grain spilled in the snow. "You, the woman?" His voice was winter wind over stone. She nodded, unable to speak. He turned away, began pulling her trunk from the overturned wagon. The driver lay groaning in the snow, leg bent wrong. Silas glanced at him, back at Mabel. "Can you walk?" "Yes." The word came out a croak. "Then walk." He threw her trunk over one shoulder like it weighed nothing, grabbed a flour sack in each hand, started up the mountain without looking back. Mabel struggled after him, skirts dragging in the snow, lungs burning in the thin air. "Behind them!" the driver called out, begging for help. Silas didn't slow. "He'll die," Mabel gasped. "Maybe." Silas didn't turn. "Storm's coming. We stop. We all die." The cabin appeared out of the snow like a dark dream. Silas kicked the door open, dropped her belongings on the floor. The interior was exactly what she'd expected. Rough, sparse, cold as a grave. A narrow bed in one corner, table and 2 chairs, fireplace with embers glowing sullen red. "You sleep there." He pointed to a door she hadn't noticed, a lean-to addition, more shed than room. "Don't touch my things. Don't speak unless spoken to. You cook, you clean, you stay out of my way." He left without another word, back into the storm. Mabel stood shivering in the center of the cabin, melting snow pooling around her feet. Through the walls, she could hear the wind rising, promising a night of howling fury. She looked around the space that was now her prison, her salvation, her new life. Then, because there was nothing else to do, she began to clean. The days fell into rhythm like hammer strikes on an anvil. Mabel woke before dawn in her shed room, ice crystals forming from her breath in the bitter air. She'd build up the fire first thing, coaxing warmth from embers that never quite died. The cast-iron pot went on for coffee, thick and black as tar. Biscuits if there was flour, cornmeal mush if not. Silas would already be gone, out checking his trap lines before first light. She'd find evidence of his presence. Fresh wood split and stacked by the door. A haunch of venison hanging in the cold storage. Wolf tracks circling the cabin where he'd stood guard in the night. But the man himself remained a ghost. sliding in and out of her life like smoke. The cabin had been filthy when she arrived. Years of bachelor living had left grease thick on every surface, dirt ground into the floorboards, cobwebs draped like funeral shrouds in the corners. Mabel attacked it with the single-minded fury of a woman who'd cleaned all her life. She boiled water, scrubbed with lye soap until her hands cracked and bled. She beat the dust from the bearskin rugs, washed the single window until weak sunlight could struggle through. Silas said nothing about the changes. He'd come in from the cold, ice in his beard, and his eyes would sweep the room without comment, but she noticed he started leaving his muddy boots by the door instead of tracking snow across her clean floors. The wilderness pressed against the cabin walls like a living thing. Wind shrieked through the passes, rattling the shutters and searching for cracks to slip through. At night, she'd hear the wolves, sometimes so close she could imagine their yellow eyes peering through the gaps in the logs. Once, something large scraped against her shed wall, claws on wood, a sound that raised every hair on her body. She lay rigid in her narrow cot, quilt pulled to her chin, until she heard Silas's door open, heard him step outside with his rifle. A shot cracked the night. In the morning, she found blood spray on the snow, but no body. He'd already dragged it away. The first time she truly saw him was 2 weeks after her arrival. She'd been hauling water from the creek, following the path he'd shown her. Never deviate, never take shortcuts. Ice could hide under innocent snow. The bucket was heavy, her back already aching from the morning's wood splitting. She slipped on a hidden patch of ice, went down hard. The bucket flew from her hands, water splashing across the snow. Pain shot through her ankle, sharp enough to bring tears. She sat in the snow, testing the joint. Not broken, thank the Lord, but twisted bad. The empty bucket lay on its side, and she'd have to make the trip again. Gritting her teeth, she pushed herself up, limped to retrieve the bucket. When she looked up, Silas stood on the rise above her, still as the pines around him, watching. She waited for him to speak, to help, to do something. He didn't move, just watched as she struggled back to the creek, filled the bucket again, began the painful journey back to the cabin. Each step sent fire through her ankle. Halfway up the path, she had to stop, breathing hard. He was gone when she looked again. That night, she served dinner in silence, venison stew, hard enough to make with one good foot. Her ankle had swollen inside her boot, throbbing with each heartbeat. Silas ate without comment, but his dark eyes tracked her limping movements. When he finished, he pushed back from the table and went outside. She heard him in the storage shed, heard things being moved around. He came back with something in his hand, a walking stick, fresh cut from a pine branch. The bark peeled away to show pale wood beneath. He set it against the wall by her door and left without a word. The cold deepened as December wore on. Some mornings the thermometer by the door showed 20 below. Ice formed on the inside walls, and she had to keep the fire roaring day and night. Her shed room was brutal. She started sleeping in all her clothes, the quilt supplemented with every spare blanket she could find. One night she woke to violent shivering, her body convulsing with cold. She tried to burrow deeper into the covers, but it wasn't enough. Her teeth chattered so hard she tasted blood. In desperation, she got up, wrapped the quilt around her shoulders, and crept to the main room. The fire had burned low, just embers glowing in the darkness. She knelt before it, feeding and kindling with numb fingers. A cough escaped her, harsh and wet, then another. She pressed her hand to her mouth, felt something warm and sticky. In the firelight, her palms showed dark with blood. Fear crawled up her spine. She'd seen consumption take people, knew how it started. Out here, with no doctor, no medicine but what nature provided. It was a death sentence. Another cough tore from her chest, bringing more blood. She didn't hear him approach. One moment she was alone with her terror. The next, Silas loomed over her, barefoot despite the cold. He took in the blood on her hand, the way she shook, and something shifted in his scarred face. Without speaking, he went to the wood pile, selected choice pieces, The fire blazed up under his expert hands, throwing dancing shadows on the walls. Heat poured out, blessed and welcome. He disappeared into his room, came back with a thick buffalo robe. "Lie down," he said. "By the fire." She obeyed. Too sick and scared to protest, he wrapped the robe around her, tucked it tight. His hands, those terrible scarred weapons, were gentle as a mother's. He brewed something on the fire, pine needle tea with honey and something else that burned going down but eased the cough. All night he tended the fire. She dozed fitfully, waking to find him adding wood, adjusting the robe, holding the cup to her lips when the coughing returned. By dawn, the fever had broken. The coughing eased to merely painful instead of terrifying. She woke fully to find him gone, but the evidence remained. The roaring fire, the empty teacup, boot prints in a circle around where she'd slept. He'd stayed up all night, standing guard while she slept. That evening, she found her belongings moved from the shed to a corner of the main room, a curtain strung up for privacy. She looked at Silas, but he was focused on cleaning his rifle, face giving nothing away. "Thank you," she said softly. He grunted, kept working on the gun, but later, when he thought she wasn't looking, she caught him watching her, not with indifference now, but something else, something that might have been concern. The wolves came closer as the winter deepened. She could hear them at night, circling the cabin, testing for weakness. One morning she found their tracks everywhere, and scratch marks on the door where they'd tried to get in. Silas reinforced the shutters, checked his rifle more frequently. "They're hungry," he said, a rare voluntary communication. "Game scarce this year. They'll try for the horses soon." Sure enough, 3 nights later she woke to the horses screaming. Silas was already moving, rifle in hand, out the door before she could even sit up. She heard the shots, rapid fire, heard the horses panic, the snarls and yelps of the pack, then silence. He came back in, blood on his jacket, not his own. She realized with relief she didn't want to examine too closely. "How many?" she asked. 7, big pack." He set the rifle down, started peeling off his bloody coat. "They'll be back, always are when they get this bold." She heated water, helped him clean the blood away. His hands shook slightly. Adrenaline, maybe, or cold. Without thinking, she covered them with her own, trying to warm them. He went absolutely still, staring down at where their hands touched. She started to pull away, but he turned his palms up, catching her fingers. They stood like that, frozen in a moment of connection. His hands dwarfed hers, the scars rough against her work-worn skin. Then he stepped back. The moment shattered. "Need to check the horses," he muttered, and fled into the cold. But that night, when she served dinner, he said, "Good stew." 2 words, but from him they felt like a speech. And when she smiled, genuinely smiled for the first time since arriving, something in his dark eyes seemed to kindle, like embers stirring to life. The grizzly had been stalking him for 3 days. Silas knew the signs, the deliberate way it followed his trap line, the fresh scratches on trees marking territory, the rank smell when the wind shifted wrong. An old male, pushed out of better hunting grounds by younger bears, desperate enough to challenge a human for food. He should have been more careful. 20 years in these mountains had taught him every danger, but spring hunger made even cautious men take risks. The last trap on his line had caught a fat beaver, and he was bent over it, working the animal free. When the attack came, the bear exploded from the undergrowth like a fury of brown death. No warning roar, no posturing, just 500 pounds of muscle and rage slamming into him. His rifle went flying, claws raked across his back, shredding his coat like paper. He rolled with the impact, grabbed for his knife, but the bear was on him again, jaws snapping for his throat. He got his arm up just in time, teeth crunched through muscle, scraped bone. Pain whited out his vision, but pain was an old friend. He found the knife, drove it up under the bear's jaw. The blade hit something vital. Hot blood poured over his hand, his face. The bear's weight went slack, crushing him into the bloody snow. It took all his strength to crawl out from under the carcass. His left arm hung useless, mangled meat and exposed bone. Claw marks burned across his back, his ribs. Blood soaked through everything, steaming in the cold air. The cabin was 2 miles through rough country. He'd never make it. But Mabel was there. The thought came unbidden, unexpected. Mabel with her quiet ways and work-rough hands. Who was he to leave her alone in this wilderness? Who else would stand guard against the wolves? He bound the worst of the damage with strips torn from his shirt, used his rifle as a walking stick. Each step was agony. The world grayed at the edges, threatened to spin away. He focused on the next tree, the next rock, the next breath. Blood left a clear trail behind him. If he passed out, the scavengers would find him before he woke, if he woke at all. The sun was setting when the cabin finally came into view. He'd fallen 3 times, forced himself up each time with pure, stubborn will. His legs gave out at the door. He managed to push it open before collapsing across the threshold. Mabel's scream brought him back to consciousness. Then her hands were on him, surprisingly strong, dragging him inside. The door slammed shut against the gathering dark. "Dear Lord," she breathed. "Dear merciful Lord." She didn't waste time on panic. Water went on to boil. His clothes came off with quick, efficient movements, her face set with determination despite the blood that covered everything. The arm was the worst. She made a sound when she saw the bone gleaming white through torn meat. "This is going to hurt," she warned. He tried to speak, managed only a croak. She gave him a leather strap to bite on, then went to work, cleaning, stitching, binding. Her needle flashed in the firelight, pulling edges of flesh together with careful precision. He'd seen rougher work from army surgeons. When had a foster child learned to sew skin like fabric? The fever came that night. He burned and froze by turns, caught in dreams where bears and raiders blended into one endless threat. Sometimes he was back in the smoking ruins of his first cabin, Sarah's body cooling under his hands, Emma's cries echoing in empty rooms. Sometimes the bear was inside him, clawing its way out through his chest. Through it all, Mabel's voice anchored him. She talked as she worked, stories about nothing, how she'd learned to make soap from her grandmother, the time she'd found an injured crow and nursed it back to health, the way her mother used to sing while hanging laundry. When he thrashed, caught in nightmare, she held him down with surprising strength. When the chills took him, she piled on blankets, pressed her own warmth against his back. "Sarah," he mumbled once, lost in fever dreams. "Sarah, I'm sorry. Should have been there. Should have—" "Hush now." Mabel's hand was cool on his burning forehead. "Just rest." Later hours or days. He couldn't tell. He heard her praying, not formal words from any book, just a quiet conversation with the Almighty. "Don't take him," she said. "I know I got no right to ask, but don't take him. This world's got plenty of men who deserve to die. This one's already paid enough." He wanted to tell her she was wrong. He hadn't paid nearly enough. A man who let his family die, who failed to protect the only good things he'd ever had. That man deserved every scar, every lonely year, every nightmare that rode him in the dark. But his throat wouldn't work, and the fever pulled him under again. When he finally surfaced, truly conscious, the cabin was bright with midday sun. He lay on his own bed, bandages wrapped tight around his chest and arm. Everything hurt, but it was healing hurt, not dying hurt. He knew the difference. Mabel dozed in the chair beside him. She'd pulled it close, and one of her hands rested on the blanket near his own. Her face showed the strained dark circles under her eyes, lines of exhaustion around her mouth. How long had she been watching over him? He shifted, trying not to wake her, but her eyes flew open immediately. For a moment, naked relief showed on her face. Then she composed herself, became the quiet, careful woman he'd grown accustomed to. "Water?" she asked. He nodded. She helped him sit up, held the cup steady. The water tasted like life itself. "How long?" His voice came out rough, unused. 4 days. The fever broke yesterday." She studied him with those steady brown eyes. "You almost died." "The bear?" "I dragged what I could back here. Meat smoking outside. Couldn't waste it, not with supplies running low. Practical, always practical. But her hand shook slightly as she set the cup down. "You did good," he managed. "The stitching, everything. Where'd you learn?" A shadow crossed her face. "Foster father was a drunk. Foster brothers were worse. You learn to patch up damage when there's no doctor to call and questions you don't want to answer." He understood then, some of what she didn't say, the reason a strong, capable woman had never married. The reason she didn't flinch from blood and violence, they were both carrying scars. His just showed more on the outside. "Thank you," he said. She looked away, color rising in her cheeks. "Couldn't hardly let you die on the doorstep. Who'd keep the wolves off?" But he'd seen her face when she thought he was sleeping, seen the way she touched his forehead, checking for fever, her fingers lingering longer than necessary. Seen her curled up on the floor beside his bed because she wouldn't leave him alone in the dark. Over the next weeks, as he healed, something shifted between them. She helped him change bandages, her touch clinical but gentle. He started talking more, not much. He'd never be a chatty man, but observations about the weather, the game patterns, plans for spring trapping. She told him about books she'd read, though she was slow with letters. He offered to help, and spent evenings by the fire teaching her words from the Bible and the almanac, the only books he owned. One night, she asked about the scars. Not the fresh ones, she knew that story, the old ones. "Grizzly," he said, touching his ruined cheek. "I was young, stupid, thought I was king of the mountain. Bear taught me different, and the others." He was quiet so long she probably thought he wouldn't answer. Then, staring into the fire, he told her, Sarah with her corn silk hair, Emma who'd just learned to walk, the day he came home to ashes and death. The years after, when he'd hunted the raiders with a single-minded fury that left him more scar than man. "Found them eventually?" he said. "5 men, hiding out in Colorado. I killed them all." She didn't flinch. "Good." He looked at her, surprised by the fierce satisfaction in her voice. "Some things can't be forgiven," she said. "Some men need killing." He thought about her foster father, those foster brothers. Wondered if they were still walking around somewhere, unpunished for whatever they'd done to her. His hand flexed, the one that could still make a fist. "Mabel?" Her name felt strange on his tongue, precious as spring water. "If you ever need someone killed." She smiled then, sad but real. "Too late for that, but thank you for offering." They sat in comfortable silence. Two damaged people who understood that some wounds never healed clean. Outside, wolves howled at the moon. Inside, the fire crackled and the coffee pot bubbled. For the first time in 15 years, Silas Thorne didn't feel alone. Winter's grip began to loosen by late March, but the pantry told a different story. The flour was gone. Coffee down to dust in the bottom of the tin. They'd been stretching the smoked meat, making soup from bones that had already given up their marrow. The root vegetables had run out 2 weeks back. Even Silas's careful planning hadn't accounted for the extra mouth to feed, the extended cold that kept game scarce. "We need supplies," he said one morning, studying the near-empty shelves. "But the pass won't be clear for another month, maybe more." Mabel stood beside him, calculating what they had left. 3 strips of jerky, a handful of beans, some wild herbs she'd dried last fall. Not enough for 2 people to last until the snow melted enough for a trip to town. "We hunt," she said simply. He looked at her, this woman who'd arrived soft and scared, who now stood steady as any mountain man. "It's dangerous. Snow's unstable this time of year. Avalanches, snow blinds, thin ice over the rivers. More dangerous than starving?" He had no answer for that. Truth was, he'd been thinking the same thing, but hunting alone meant leaving her undefended. The wolves had been quiet lately, but that didn't mean they were gone. "You ever shoot a rifle?" "Some," at his raised eyebrow. She added, "Foster boys liked their target practice. I learned to shoot back." He spent the next day teaching her to handle his spare rifle, an old Spencer that kicked like a mule but shot true. Her first shots went wild, but she learned fast, adjusting for the weapon's quirks. By evening, she could hit a pine cone at 50 yards. "You'll do," he said, which from him was high praise. They left at first light. Loaded light ammunition, rope, knives, canvas for shelter if they got caught out. Mabel had fashioned herself winter gear from various pelts, looking like some wild woman of the mountains. The transformation from the frightened creature who'd fallen out of that wagon made something tight ease in his chest. The high country was a different world in late winter. Snow lay deep but crusty, strong enough to hold their weight if they were careful. Ice gleamed from every surface when the sun broke through the clouds, beautiful and deadly in equal measure. They climbed steadily, following game trails Silas knew by heart. Mabel kept up better than he'd expected, her breath clouding in the thin air but her pace steady. They didn't talk sound, carried strange in the mountains, and prey animals were skittish this late in the season. By midday, they'd found sign, elk tracks, fresh, heading toward a sheltered valley where Silas knew the animals liked to yard up. He touched Mabel's arm, pointed. She nodded, understanding. The stalk took 2 hours. Moving silent through snow wasn't natural for most people, but Mabel learned by watching him. Place each foot careful, test the surface, shift weight gradual, use the trees for cover, keep the wind in your face. When they finally spotted the elk, a small group, mostly cows with yearling calves, they were within reasonable rifle range. Silas lined up on a young bull, clean shot to the lungs, but as he squeezed the trigger, the snow under his feet gave way. The shot went wide. The elk scattered. He cursed, struggling to find footing in the collapsed drift. Then Mabel's rifle cracked. The young bull stumbled, took 3 steps, and went down clean. She lowered the Spencer, looked at him with eyes bright as stars. Got him. Pride wasn't something Silas felt often anymore, but it bloomed in his chest then. You did good. Woman, real good. They worked together to field dress the animal, hands bloody in the cold. It was hard work, but they were both grinning like fools. Meat for weeks, maybe months if they were careful. The hide would make good leather. The bones would flavor soup. Nothing wasted. They quartered the elk, hung the meat high in a pine to cache it. They'd have to make multiple trips to pack it all back to the cabin. For now, they loaded what they could carry and started the trek back. The storm hit without warning. One moment the sky was clear, the next, snow fell thick as curtains. The wind rose to a howl, driving ice crystals that stung like needles. Within minutes, Silas couldn't see 10 feet ahead. "Stay close," he shouted over the wind. He felt Mabel's hand grab his pack, holding tight. They needed shelter fast. He knew these mountains, but a whiteout made every landmark disappear. Move the wrong direction and they'd walk off a cliff or into a ravine. He trusted his instincts, led them sidewise along what he hoped was the ridge. His face was numb, ice forming on his beard. Behind him, he could hear Mabel struggling, but she didn't complain. There, a darker shadow in the white. The cave he'd been hoping for, really just an overhang of rock, but enough to get them out of the wind. They ducked inside, gasping. "We waited out," he said. "Could blow over in an hour, could last all night." Mabel nodded, teeth chattering. Her lips were blue, frost painting her eyelashes white. He pulled her against him, trying to share warmth. She stiffened for a moment, then relaxed into his chest. They had no wood for fire, but he'd packed an emergency canvas. He wrapped it around them both, making a small shelter within the shelter. Body heat was all they had. As the storm raged outside, they huddled together in the dark. Mabel's shivers gradually eased. She was soft against him, her head tucked under his chin. He could smell her hair, smoke and pine, and something uniquely her... "Silas?" Her voice was small in the darkness. "Yeah? I'm not sorry. For what? Being here, coming to you. I know I wasn't what you expected." "No, you didn't want..." She trailed off. He was quiet for a long moment. "You're right. Wasn't what I expected." He felt her tense, start to pull away. He tightened his arms. Expected another woman who'd run screaming. Expected weakness. His voice was rough. Got strength instead. Got someone who drags bare-mauled fools inside and stitches them up. Someone who shoots elk clean at 70 yards. Someone who... He stopped, words failing him. Someone who what? The darkness made it easier to speak. Someone who makes that cabin feel less like a tomb. She was crying, he realized. Silent tears that soaked into his shirt. He didn't know what to do with tears. So he just held her tighter. I never expected, she whispered, to feel safe. But I do. With you. Something cracked inside him then. Some wall he'd built from grief and rage and years of solitude. He pressed his face into her hair, breathed her in. Mabel. Just her name, but it held everything he couldn't say. She lifted her face in the darkness. He couldn't see her, but he could feel her breath on his skin. The space between them collapsed like snow under weight. The kiss was clumsy, desperate. Two people who'd forgotten how to be gentle trying to remember. Her hands fisted in his shirt. His arms crushed her close. They kissed like drowning people finding air, like lost souls finding home. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard. She laughed, a shaky, wondering sound. What? He asked. Mrs. Henderson said you must be a monster to make all those women run. Still might be. She found his scarred face in the dark, traced the damage with gentle fingers. No, monsters don't stand guard against wolves. Don't teach broken women to shoot. Don't hold them safe in storms. They kissed again, softer this time. The storm howled outside their small shelter, but inside, something new and fragile and precious took root. When the wind finally died near dawn, they emerged into a world transformed. Fresh snow blanketed everything, pristine and sparkling. The sun broke through the clouds, setting the ice crystals on fire with light. They made their way back to the cabin in companionable silence. But everything had changed. Small touches. His hand helping her over a drift, her fingers brushing his as they walked. The awareness between them sang like a struck bell. That night, after they'd hauled the first load of elk meat back, after dinner and chores and the familiar routine, they stood awkward in the cabin. The bed, his bed, loomed between them. I could put the curtain back up, she offered. Sleep in my corner. He caught her hand. No, just that, but she understood. Smiled that smile that transformed her plain face into something beautiful. They came together in the dim light of banked fires, careful of his still healing wounds, gentle with each other's scars. Two people who'd thought themselves beyond love, finding it in the last place they'd expected, a cabin at the roof of the world, surrounded by wolves and winter and the wild silence of the mountains. The man rode up to the cabin on a mud-splattered horse just as the last patches of snow were melting into the earth. Silas saw him coming from a quarter-mile off, his instincts for danger as sharp as ever. Something about the rider's posture, the way he sat his saddle like he owned the mountain, set every nerve on edge. Get inside, he told Mabel, who was hanging, washing on the line. Take the rifle. She didn't question, just gathered her skirts and moved quick into the cabin. He loved that about her. No foolish arguments when trouble showed its face. The rider was a lean man with cold eyes and clothes that had seen better days. But it was the pistol worn low on his hip, tied down gunfighter style, that told Silas what kind of man this was. Help you? Silas kept his hand casual near his own weapon. The man spat tobacco juice, eyes scanning the homestead. Name's Jake Morrison. Come from Denver way. His gaze lingered on the washing. Women's underthings mixed with Silas's shirts. Heard tell you got yourself a woman up here. My wife. What's it to you? Morrison grinned, showing yellowed teeth. Well now, that's the thing. See, I'm in the business of providing brides to lonely men. The one you got, big gal, plain face. She was bought and paid for by another customer. Man down in the mining camps, paid good money too. She's my wife, Silas repeated, voice dropping to a growl. Got papers saying different. Morrison pulled out a folded document, waved it like a flag. Legal contract. She belongs to whoever holds this paper, and that ain't you. Friend? Silas didn't need to read it to know what it was. The marriage brokers traded women like cattle, contracts passing from hand to hand. Legal in the territories, where women were scarce and law was whatever men with guns said it was. "How much?" he asked. Morrison's grin widened. "Now we're talking business. The miner paid $200, but seeing as how you already broke her in, so to speak, I'd need $300 to make it worth my trouble. She's not for sale. Everything's for sale. Mountain man. Just a matter of price." Morrison leaned forward in his saddle. "Though looking at her, can't imagine why you'd want to keep her. Big as a barn, face like a mud fence. The miner won't care. He just needs someone to cook and clean and warm his bed. But you could get yourself a pretty little thing. Man like you." Silas hit him. One moment Morrison was running his mouth. The next, he was on the ground, blood streaming from his nose. The horse shied away, whinnying. Morrison came up with his pistol half drawn before freezing. Silas had his rifle leveled at the man's chest. "Get on your horse," Silas said quietly. "Ride out. Don't come back." Morrison wiped blood from his face, eyes calculating. "This ain't over. I'll be back, and I won't be alone. That contract's legal. She's stolen property, and you're harboring her. Try it." Something in Silas's voice, the absolute certainty of violence, made Morrison step back. He caught his horse, mounted carefully. "1 week," he said. "You got 1 week to come to your senses, $300, or things get unpleasant." He touched his hat in mock courtesy. "Ma'am," he called toward the cabin, "be seeing you real soon." He rode off, but Silas stood watching until horse and rider disappeared into the trees. Only then did he lower the rifle. Mabel emerged from the cabin, her face pale but composed. "I heard." "He'll be back, with help, like he said." Silas turned to her. "Could give you money. Send you somewhere else. California, maybe, or Oregon. Somewhere they can't find you." She crossed her arms. "Is that what you want? What I want doesn't matter. It's your safety. Silas Thorne." Her voice cut through his words like a blade. "I spent my whole life being sent places, handed off like an unwanted package. I'm done with that." She stepped close, looked up at him with fierce brown eyes. "This is my home. You're my husband. Legal papers or not. If they want me, they'll have to go through both of us." He caught her face in his hands. "Woman, you don't know what you're saying. Men like Morrison, they don't fight fair. They'll burn us out, shoot us down. Then we'd best be ready." She covered his hands with hers. "I'm not leaving. Not unless you drag me off this mountain yourself. Mabel." "No, I won't run anymore. Won't hide. For the first time in my life. I have something worth fighting for." Her voice broke slightly. "I have you." He kissed her then, hard and desperate. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "All right," he said. "We fight." They spent the next days preparing. Silas reinforced the cabin's defenses, heavy shutters for the windows. Firing ports cut at strategic angles. He hauled water barrels inside, laid in ammunition, checked and rechecked every weapon. Mabel worked alongside him, steady as stone. She molded bullets, prepared medical supplies, stored food and water. When he showed her the hidey hole he'd dug beneath the floorboards years ago, she nodded grimly and stocked it with supplies. "If things go bad," he started. "Things won't go bad." She checked the load on the Spencer. "We've survived worse than some Denver lowlife with hired guns." On the 5th day, Silas rode out to scout. He found their tracks easy enough. 4 riders had made camp 2 miles down the mountain. Watching, waiting. They'd come at dawn, most likely. Men like that liked the drama of sunrise attacks. He slipped back home as quiet as he'd left. Found Mabel cleaning his best rifle. "Tomorrow," he told her. She nodded, kept working. That night, they lay together in the dark, not talking about what morning might bring. Her head on his chest, his arms tight around her. If this was their last night, at least they'd had these months of unexpected happiness, of finding love where neither had thought to look for it. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. First time either of them had said it aloud. "And I love you," he replied. The words rusty but true. They came at dawn, just as he'd predicted. 4 riders plus Morrison, spreading out to surround the cabin. Silas watched from the window, rifle ready. "Thorn," Morrison called. "Last chance to do this peaceful-like. Send the woman out, and we ride away." "Go to hell," Mabel shouted back, which surprised a laugh out of Silas despite everything. "Your funeral," Morrison replied. The first shots shattered the morning quiet. Windows exploded inward, showering glass. Silas and Mabel returned fire from different ports, making the attackers think there were more defenders than just 2. The battle was fierce, but brief. These weren't hardened fighters, just hired thugs looking for easy money. When Silas put a bullet through one man's shoulder and Mabel clipped another's leg, their enthusiasm waned considerably. But Morrison was smarter than his hired help. While his men kept them pinned with rifle fire, he circled around back. Silas heard him on the roof, trying to find a way in. "Watch the front," he told Mabel, then slipped out the back door. Morrison was prying at the chimney when Silas came around the corner. The man spun, pistol rising, but Silas was already moving. They crashed together, rolling across the sloped roof. Morrison was quick, vicious, fighting dirty with knees and elbows, but Silas had 15 years of mountain living, 15 years of rage behind his fists. They tumbled off the roof together, hit the ground hard. Morrison's pistol went flying. They rolled in the mud, punching, gouging, each trying for advantage. Morrison pulled a knife, the blade flashing in the early light. Silas caught his wrist, twisted, bones cracked. The knife fell. Morrison screamed, cradling his broken wrist. Silas stood over him, breathing hard. "Legal contract," Morrison gasped. "She's legal property. You can't—" Silas picked up the knife, used it to pin the contract to the ground. "Your legal papers don't mean nothing up here. Mountain law says different." He hauled Morrison to his feet, shoved him toward his horse. The other attackers had already fled, leaving their wounded companion groaning in the dirt. "Take your friend and go," Silas said. "Come back again. I'll kill you all. That's a promise." Morrison's eyes were full of hate, but also fear. He'd seen something in Silas during their fight, the kind of man who'd hunted down 5 raiders and left them in shallow graves. He helped his wounded companion onto a horse, mounted his own animal awkwardly with his broken wrist. "This ain't over," he said, but the words lacked conviction. "Yes," Silas replied. "It is." They watched the riders disappear down the mountain trail. Mabel emerged from the cabin, rifle still in hand. Her hair was wild, a cut on her cheek from flying glass, gunpowder staining her fingers. She'd never looked more beautiful to him. "Think they'll be back?" she asked. "No, men like that want easy prey. We proved we're anything but easy." She leaned against him, suddenly exhausted. "So we're safe." He wrapped his arm around her. "As safe as anyone can be in this world." That night, as they cleaned up glass and patched bullet holes, Silas carved something new into the doorframe. Not just his name this time, but both of theirs. Silas and Mabel Thorne. Let anyone who came calling know this was their place, defended by mountain law and the fierce love of 2 people who'd found each other against all odds. Spring bloomed across the mountain in waves of green and gold. Wildflowers pushed through the last stubborn snow, and the air filled with bird song and the sound of rushing water from melting ice. For the first time in 15 years, Silas noticed the beauty of it, saw it through Mabel's wondering eyes. They worked side by side, expanding the garden plot, repairing winter damage to the cabin. Mabel had plans, herbs for cooking and medicine, vegetables for the root cellar, even flowers just for the joy of them. Silas built her raised beds, hauled rich soil from the forest floor, anything to see her smile. The ring came to him in pieces, an old silver dollar, worn smooth from years in his pocket. 2 bullets that had missed their mark during the fight with Morrison's men. He melted them down in his small forge, usually reserved for trap repairs, and worked the metal with patient hands. It wasn't fancy, wasn't even perfectly round, but it was honest work from honest materials. "What you making?" Mabel asked one evening, trying to peer over his shoulder. "Nothing," he grunted, hiding the work. "Mind your biscuits before they burn." She laughed, swatted him with a dish towel, went back to her cooking, but he caught her sneaking glances, curiosity bright in her eyes. He finished it by the light of a full moon, polishing the silver until it gleamed. Inside the band, he'd managed to engrave their initials, S and M intertwined like their lives had become. It wasn't much, but it was all he had to give. The next morning dawned clear and perfect. Mabel was in the garden, kneeling in the dirt, coaxing life from seeds. The sun caught in her hair, turned her plain brown braids to copper. She was humming something, a hymn maybe, lost in the simple pleasure of growing things. "Mabel." She looked up, shading her eyes with one muddy hand. "What is it? You look strange." He did feel strange, heart hammering like he was facing down a grizzly, mouth dry as August dust. He'd fought men and bears, survived blizzards and starvation, but this tiny woman in her patched dress had him terrified. "We never did things proper," he said. "The marriage broker, that wasn't right." She stood slowly, confusion on her face. "Silas, what?" He dropped to one knee in the garden dirt, pulled out the ring. Her hands flew to her mouth. "I ain't good with words," he said. "You know that, but you took this broken-down mountain man and made him remember how to be human. You stayed when everyone else ran. You fought for us when it would have been easier to go." He swallowed hard. "I love you, Mabel Grace. Would you do me the honor of being my wife, proper this time?" She was crying, he realized with panic. But then she was in his arms, both of them kneeling in the dirt, her kissing his scarred face again and again. "Yes," she said between kisses. "Yes, you foolish man," as if I could say anything else. The ring fit perfect, like it was meant to be there all along. They stayed there in the garden, holding each other while the mountain breeze played around them, and somewhere in the pines a mockingbird sang its heart out. Summer arrived in full glory. They made the trip to town, the first time Mabel had left the mountain since her arrival. Silas watched her take in the bustle of the settlement, the shops and people and noise. But when someone asked if she was happy to be back in civilization, she just smiled. "This isn't civilization," she said. "Civilization is a man who stands guard against wolves. It's a woman who'll stitch you up when you're bleeding. It's two people choosing each other every day, no matter what comes." They found a traveling preacher, convinced him to ride back with them for a proper ceremony. It wasn't fancy, just them and the preacher in front of the cabin, mountains as witness. Mabel wore her best dress, had wildflowers in her hair. Silas had trimmed his beard, looked almost respectable except for the scars and the wildness that would never quite leave his eyes. "Do you, Silas, take this woman?" "I do." No hesitation. "Do you, Mabel, take this man?" "I do." Clear as mountain water. When they kissed, the preacher said later he felt like he was watching something sacred, something that had been waiting to happen since the world was made. They settled into the rhythm of married life, the real kind, not the awkward arrangement they'd started with. Silas learned the particular way Mabel liked her coffee, the songs she hummed when happy, the way she bit her lip when concentrating on mending. She learned his silences, which meant contentment and which meant old ghosts visiting, how to draw him back with a touch when the memories got too dark. One evening in late July, Silas was cleaning his rifle when Mabel suddenly set down her sewing and rushed outside. He heard her retching, found her leaning against the cabin wall, pale and shaky. "Bad meat?" he asked, worried. "Summer heat could turn food quick." She shook her head, a strange expression on her face, fear and wonder mixed. "Silas, I know." She took his hand, pressed it to her belly. "I'm carrying—" The world stopped, his hand on her still flat stomach, feeling nothing but knowing everything had changed. A child, After Sarah, after Emma, he'd never thought. "You're happy?" Mabel asked, uncertain at his silence. He pulled her close, buried his face in her hair so she wouldn't see the tears. "Happy don't cover it," he managed. "Scared, maybe, but happy too. God, Mabel, so happy it hurts." She held him while he shook, this mountain of a man reduced to tears by the promise of new life. "We'll be all right," she whispered. "All three of us." The summer days took on new meaning. Every sunrise might be one their child would see. Every sunset painted the sky in colors their baby would someday point at in wonder. Silas found himself working harder than ever, reinforcing the cabin, laying in supplies, preparing for a winter with a pregnant wife, and then, God willing, a baby come spring. Mabel bloomed with pregnancy like the garden under her care. Her face softened. Her step gained a careful grace. She talked to the baby constantly, telling stories, singing lullabies, explaining the daily work as if the child could understand. "Little one needs to know," she said when Silas teased her about it. "Needs to know it's Mama's voice. It's home." He started talking to the baby too, late at night when Mabel slept. His hand on her growing belly, feeling the first flutter of movement. He told different stories. How to read wolf's sign, where to find the best fishing holes, which berries were safe and which would kill you. Practical things, but also promises. "Won't let nothing happen to you," he whispered. "Not like before. Your mama and me. We'll keep you safe, give you a good life up here. Teach you to be strong, but gentle too, like her." One night, a thunderstorm rolled through the mountains, fierce and wild. Lightning split the sky. Thunder shook the cabin walls. Mabel woke gasping, hand pressed to her side. "Just the baby," she said. "Doesn't like the noise." Silas lit a lantern, held her until the storm passed. In the flickering light, she looked young and scared and beautiful. "What if I'm not a good mother?" she asked. "I never had one. Not really. What if I don't know how?" "You'll know," he said. "Same way you knew how to save me when that bear got me. Same way you knew how to stand and fight instead of run. You got instincts, Mabel Thorne, good ones." She smiled at her name, still got pleased when he called her that, like she couldn't quite believe it was real. "Tell me about Emma," she said suddenly. "Your daughter." He tensed, but her hand on his chest was gentle, patient. So he talked. About Emma's first laugh, how she'd been fascinated by his beard, always tugging on it, how she'd taken her first steps chasing a butterfly, how Sarah used to sing to her, the same lullabies Mabel now sang to their unborn child. "She would have loved you," he said finally. "Both of them would have. I hope I can honor their memory," Mabel said. "Raise this child the way they would have wanted. You honor them by living," he said, "by being happy, by giving me a reason to keep going when I thought I had none." August turned to September, the aspens going gold on the higher slopes. Mabel was round as a pumpkin now, moving careful but still determined to work. Silas watched her like a hawk, ready to catch her if she stumbled, to carry whatever needed carrying. One crisp morning, she stood at the cabin door, hands on her back, watching the sunrise paint the peaks. "I want our child to see this," she said, "to grow up knowing there's still wild, beautiful places, still room to breathe." He wrapped his arms around her from behind, hands meeting over her belly. The baby kicked, strong and sure. "They will," he promised. "This is their birthright, these mountains, this freedom. We'll teach them to love it like we do. Like I learned to love it," she corrected. "Through your eyes first, then my own." They stood together, watching the world wake up, feeling their child move between them. Two people who'd thought love had passed them by, now rich beyond measure in the currency that mattered. The cabin that had once been a tomb of old grief now rang with Mabel's laughter, with plans for the future, with the promise of new life come spring. The wolves still howled at night. Winter still waited with its killing cold. The world beyond the mountains still held its share of men like Morrison. But here, now, they had this love, hope, and the fierce determination to protect both. Whatever comes, Mabel said, as if reading his thoughts. We'll face it together. Together, he agreed, and knew it for the truest word he'd ever spoken. The decision to leave came hard but necessary. After Morrison's attack, Silas knew the cabin's location was compromised. Men like that had long memories and longer grudges. With a baby coming, they couldn't risk another visit from hired guns or claimed jumpers. There's a valley, he told Mabel one evening, spreading out his hand-drawn map. 3 days northeast, deeper in the wilderness. Found it years back, tracking elk. Sweet water spring, natural windbreak. Harder to find than this place. Mabel studied the map, one hand resting on her swollen belly. 7 months along now, moving slower but still determined. When do we go? Soon as we can, before you're too far along to travel, before the first heavy snow. She nodded, practical as always. Then we'd best start packing. They worked through September, preparing for the move. Silas made multiple trips, hauling supplies to cache at the new site. Each journey, he improved the rough trail, cleared deadfall, marked the safest routes. The new place was perfect, a hidden valley cupped between peaks, with a clear stream running through and timber enough for building. Mabel packed their life into manageable loads. The quilt her mother made, the cast-iron pot, their few books, the medical supplies she'd accumulated. She wrapped everything careful, knowing rough travel could break what they couldn't replace. Feels strange, she said one night, looking around the cabin. This was where we found each other. We'll build better. Silas promised. Room for the little one to grow. Real windows. Maybe wooden floor instead of dirt. I don't need fancy. Just need you and this baby safe. The morning they left for good. Mabel insisted on one last thing. She took a coal from the fire, wrapped it careful in wet leaves and clay. For the new hearth, she explained. So something of our beginning comes with us. The journey was slow, careful. Silas had rigged a travois for the heavier goods, but Mabel walked, stubborn about not being hauled like cargo. They stopped often, letting her rest, both of them anxious about the baby. The second night, camped under stars sharp as glass. She grabbed his hand, sudden-like. Here, she said, pressing his palm to her belly. Feel. The baby moved under his hand, a rolling motion like a fish in a barrel. He'd felt kicks before, but this was different, sustained, purposeful, like the child was swimming, eager to be free. Strong, he said, wonder in his voice. Like the father, she said, then smiled. Stubborn like the mother. They reached the valley on the 3rd day, just as Mabel was starting to flag. She stood at the overlook, taking in their new home, the meadow golden with autumn grass, the stream silver in the slanted light, the protective walls of granite rising all around. Oh, Silas, she breathed. It's perfect. He'd already started the cabin foundation on his scouting trips, laying stones pulled from the creek. Together they raised the walls. Though Silas did the heavy lifting while Mabel directed and did what she could, the structure came together quickly, larger than the old place, with a separate room planned for the baby. As September turned to October, their new home took shape. Silas built with winter in mind, chinking every gap, laying a floor of split pine that Mabel scrubbed smooth. She hung herbs from the rafters to dry, arranged their few possessions to make the space welcoming. The fireplace was special care. Silas built it wide and deep, with hooks for cooking pots and a bread oven built into the side. When it was ready, Mabel unwrapped the coal from their old home, still glowing faint red at its heart. She placed it careful among the kindling, blew it to life. New fire from old, continuity and change. October brought the first snow, just dustings that melted by noon. But winter was coming, and they both felt the urgency. Silas hunted every day the weather allowed, smoking meat, preparing hides. Mabel rendered fat for candles and soap, gathered the last herbs before frost killed them, knitted tiny clothes from unraveled sweaters. One night, working by the fire, she held up a small cap she'd just finished. Hard to believe something so small is coming. Your baby will have your strength, Silas said. Won't stay small long. She smiled, then winced, hand going to her back. The baby was sitting low now, making every movement an effort. But she kept working, kept preparing. Mountain women didn't have the luxury of lying in. The storm hit in early November, a howler that dumped 3 feet of snow in 2 days. They were ready, wood stacked high, food stored, water barrels full. But as the wind shrieked around their new walls, Mabel grew restless. "Something's different," she said, pacing despite her bulk. "I feel strange." Silas watched her, anxiety rising. They were truly alone out here. No midwife to call, no help if something went wrong. He'd delivered calves and foals, but this may be just the storm, he said. Air pressure does things. But that night, her water broke. "Too early," she gasped, gripping his hand. "2 months too early. It's not time." "Baby says different," he said, fighting to keep his voice calm. "We do this together, you and me." The labor came fast and hard. Mabel tried to muffle her cries, some instinct warning that noise brought predators. Silas boiled water, laid out clean cloths, tried to remember everything he'd seen when Emma was born. But that had been in a town, with a midwife who knew her business. This was just them in the storm, and a baby fighting to enter the world too soon. "I can't," Mabel sobbed after hours of contractions. "Silas, I can't." "You can," he said fierce. "You're the strongest woman I know. You survived everything life threw at you. You won't quit now." She laughed through her tears, wild and painful. "Don't have much choice, do I?" The final stage came as the storm reached its peak. Wind howling like all the demons of hell. Snow driving horizontal past the windows. Mabel bore down with a strength that humbled him, her face set with the same determination that had kept her on this mountain when others fled. "I see the head," Silas said. "Dark hair like yours. Push, Mabel, push." The baby came in a rush of blood and fluid, tiny and perfect and absolutely still. "No," Mabel gasped. "No, please." Silas held the infant, a boy, so small he fit in Silas's 2 hands. No cry, no movement. The cord was wrapped around his neck, had been choking him. Silas freed it with shaking fingers, turned the baby over, rubbed his back. "Nothing. Give him to me," Mabel demanded. She took their son, pressed him to her chest, started talking, not prayers, just words, how long they'd waited for him, how much they loved him, how he needed to breathe, needed to fight. "Come on, little one," she whispered. "Your mama didn't come all this way to lose you now. Your papa didn't build this home for empty rooms. Come on, baby, breathe." Silas found himself praying for the first time since Sarah died. Not formal words, just desperate pleading with whatever power might listen. This woman had saved him, brought him back to life. Their child deserved the same chance. The baby coughed, a tiny sound, barely audible over the wind. Then a cry, thin but real, the most beautiful sound either of them had ever heard. "There you are," Mabel sobbed, laughing and crying at once. "There's my fighter." They wrapped him warm. This early baby who'd chosen a blizzard for his entrance. He was small but perfect, 10 tiny fingers, 10 tiny toes, a shock of dark hair and eyes that seemed to hold all the wisdom of the mountains. "What do we call him?" Mabel asked, exhausted but radiant. Silas looked at his son, their son, and knew. Caleb means faithful in the book. Seems right, after everything. "Caleb Thorne," Mabel said, testing the sound. "I like it." The storm blew itself out by morning, leaving a world transformed. Everything buried in white, pristine and new. Inside the cabin, by the fire that had traveled from their old home, a new family began. Caleb was small but fierce, nursing with determination that made his parents smile. Mabel recovered quick, tough as the mountain women who'd come before. Silas found himself hovering, checking on them constantly, still hardly believing they'd both survived. "We did it," Mabel said one quiet afternoon, the baby sleeping in her arms. "All of us, together." "You did it," Silas corrected. "I just caught him." She laughed soft. "Well, Someone had to. These hands that can dress a deer and build a cabin, they caught our sun. Gentle as morning dew when it mattered. Winter settled deep around them. But inside was warmth and life and hope. They'd built more than a cabin in this hidden valley. They'd built a future. The boy would grow up wild and free, learning the mountains from his father, gentleness from his mother. He'd know where to find spring water and winter shelter, how to read storm sign and animal track. But he'd also know love, deep and true and unshakable. At night, with snow falling soft outside and their son sleeping between them, Mabel would tell stories about a scarred mountain man who thought his heart had died, about a woman everyone called worthless who proved them wrong, about how they found each other in a frozen cabin and made it bloom with unexpected love. And they lived happily, she always ended. Ever after? Silas would ask, playing along. No, she'd say, practical even in stories. They lived happily right now. Tomorrow will take care of itself, and in their hidden valley, with their miracle son and their salvaged love. Right now was more than enough. It was everything. The blizzard struck without warning on a February night when Caleb was barely 3 months old. Silas woke to the cabin shaking, wind screaming through the valley like a wounded animal. The temperature had dropped so fast the sap in the pine logs cracked like gunshots. "Storm's bad," he told Mabel, already pulling on his boots. "Need to check the animals, make sure we got enough wood close." She nodded. The baby sleeping peaceful in the cradle Silas had carved. Amazing how the child could sleep through anything, maybe knowing in his bones he was safe, loved, protected. Outside was chaos. Snow fell so thick Silas couldn't see his hand at arm's length. The wind knocked him sideways, drove ice crystals into every gap in his clothing. He fought his way to the lean-to where the horses sheltered, found them huddled together, eyes rolling white with fear. He calmed them best he could, made sure they had feed and water, then started hauling wood. The storm raged for 3 days. They kept the fire burning constant, Mabel nursing Caleb by its light while wind tried to tear the roof off. On the second night, something heavy hit the door, a tree blown down, or maybe a desperate animal seeking shelter. They never knew. By morning, snow had drifted halfway up the walls. "We're buried," Mabel said, looking at the blocked windows. "We're safe," Silas corrected. "Snow's insulation. Keep us warmer." She smiled at his mountain logic, went back to singing to Caleb. The baby watched her with those dark eyes, so alert for one so young. Sometimes Silas swore the child understood everything, the danger outside, the safety within, the fierce love that surrounded him like armor. When the storm finally broke, they emerged to a transformed world. Drifts 20 feet high had reshaped the landscape, trees down everywhere, the creek frozen solid under tons of snow. It would take days just to dig out paths to necessary places. But they were alive, all 3 of them. The cabin had held. The fire still burned from that coal carried from their first home. And Caleb cooed and gurgled, tiny fists waving like he was ready to take on the world. Spring came late that year, but when it arrived, it exploded across the valley in waves of color. Mabel carried Caleb outside for the first time in weeks, letting him feel sun on his face. He blinked at the brightness, then laughed, his first real laugh, like bells ringing across the meadow. "He's perfect," she said, watching their son discover the world. "Like his mother," Silas replied, which made her blush even after all this time. They fell into the rhythm of parenthood, each finding their role. Mabel sang to Caleb while she worked, telling him stories about everything she did. Silas carried the boy on his chest while checking traps, pointing out tracks, teaching without words about the world he'd inherit. By summer, Caleb was crawling everywhere, a terror on hands and knees. They'd find him heading for the door, the fire, anything dangerous with single-minded determination. Mabel laughed that he'd gotten the stubborn from both sides, double strong. "Gonna be a handful," Silas said, catching the boy before he could eat a handful of dirt. "Already is," Mabel replied, but her smile said she wouldn't have it any other way. One August evening, they sat outside the cabin, Caleb playing with pine cones at their feet. The sun painted the peaks gold and crimson. eagles circling high on the thermals. Peace settled over the valley like a blessing. "Never thought I'd have this again," Silas said quiet-like. "Family, home, reason to see tomorrow." Mabel took his scarred hand in hers. "Life's strange that way. Takes everything, then gives it back different. Not the same, but maybe what we needed instead of what we wanted." "You saying you needed a broken-down mountain man?" "I'm saying I needed you. Exactly you. Scars and ghosts and all." She squeezed his hand. "Just like you needed a fat foster girl nobody else wanted." "You ain't fat," he said automatic, like he had from the beginning. "You're strong, perfect size for this life." She laughed, leaned into his shoulder. Caleb looked up at the sound, grinned with his 2 new teeth showing. Already he had his mother's smile, the one that transformed plain features into beauty. As summer turned to fall, they prepared for another winter, but different this time. Not just survival, but living. Mabel had planted a bigger garden, root vegetables stored in the cold cellar Silas had dug. He'd hunted successful, meat smoked and dried, enough to see them through till spring and then some. One morning, Silas was teaching Caleb to stack kindling, the boy more hindrance than help but determined to try, when horses appeared at the valley entrance. 2 riders, moving careful down the hidden trail. Silas had his rifle in hand before the thought formed, but then one rider waved, called out, "Hello, the cabin, meaning no harm." It was the preacher who'd married them. Weather-beaten face split by a genuine smile. With him rode a woman, middle-aged and practical-looking. "Thought you folks had disappeared entire," the preacher said. "Dismounting careful? Been asking after you in town. Nobody knew where you'd gone." "That was the idea," Silas said, but lowered the rifle. "This here's Mrs. Walsh," the preacher continued. "She's a midwife, been traveling the territory, wanted to check on any women who might have birthed alone." Mabel emerged from the cabin, Caleb on her hip. The midwife's eyes went straight to the baby, assessing with professional interest. "Well, someone did just fine without me," Mrs. Walsh said. "That's a healthy boy if I ever saw one. Born in the storm." "How did you know?" Mabel asked. "Got that look. Storm babies are fighters. Everyone." She smiled. "Mind if I check you both over? Free of charge. Part of my ministry. You might say..." They invited the visitors in, served coffee and elk stew. Mrs. Walsh examined both Mabel and Caleb with gentle expertise, pronouncing them healthy as horses. The preacher played with Caleb, who took to the stranger with fearless curiosity. "You folks done good out here," the preacher said. "Seen too many fail, trying to live this life, but you've made something special." As they prepared to leave, Mrs. Walsh pulled Mabel aside. "You need anything, you send word. I know you're strong, but every woman needs help sometimes. No shame in it." "Thank you," Mabel said. "But we have everything we need." The midwife looked around, the solid cabin, the stored food, the clear love between husband and wife, the healthy child. "I believe you do at that." After they left, taking news of the thriving family back to civilization, Mabel found Silas carving something new on the doorframe. Not just their names now, but Caleb's too, and the date of his birth. "Establishing our claim," he said. "This is Thorn land now, all of ours." Winter came again, but gentler this time. Caleb took his first steps on Christmas Eve, tottering between his parents with arms spread wide for balance. They cheered like he'd climbed Everest, which made him laugh and fall on his padded bottom. "He'll be running by spring," Mabel predicted. "Lord help us then." She was right. By the time green touched the valley again, Caleb was everywhere at once, chasing butterflies, following his father like a devoted shadow, helping his mother in ways that made twice the work. But the cabin rang with laughter now, with baby babble growing into first words, with the sound of a family living full and free. They marked his growth on the doorframe too, little notches showing how fast he shot up, fed on mountain air and wild game and vegetables from soil made rich with love and labor. He grew strong and straight. His hair stayed dark like his mother's, but his eyes, those were Silas's eyes, deep and watchful, taking in everything. "What do you see out there?" Mabel asked one evening, watching father and son stand together at the valley's edge, looking out at the endless mountains. "Home," Silas said simply. "Far as the eye can see, far as the heart can reach. Home." She joined them, Caleb reaching up to be held. They stood together as the sun set, painting their world in shades of gold and purple. Three souls who'd found each other against all odds, who'd built something lasting in a hard place. Not perfect, maybe, but real, true as the mountains that sheltered them, strong as the love that bound them, wild and free as the wind that sang through the pines. In the doorframe of their cabin, the carved names grew darker with age and weather. Silas, Mabel, Caleb. A family born of loss and loneliness, tempered by hardship, made perfect by choice. They'd written their own story on this mountaintop, and it was good. The fire still burned from that original coal, carried from their first home. It would burn as long as they tended it, warm their children and their children's children. A legacy of love in a wild place. Proof that sometimes the best things come to those who stay, who fight, who choose each other again and again, until choosing becomes as natural as breathing. And in their hidden valley, as night settled soft and star-filled, a baby's laughter echoed off ancient stones, the sound of hope, of future, of home. Thank you all for listening to this tale of love found in the most unlikely of places. If you're enjoying these stories around our Wild West Campfire, I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from. Drop a comment below and let's connect across the miles. Don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more tales of courage, love, and survival from the American frontier. Share your thoughts about Silas and Mabel's journey. Did their love story touch your heart as it did mine? Until next time, partners, keep your fires burning bright and your hearts open to unexpected blessings.